And this is, of course, the 10 Eyewitness News coverage of the Gulf, the war in the Gulf. And as Mary-Anne Loughlin just said, it is the most comprehensive coverage we can possibly bring you of the war. We too will take a break. Back shortly. You're with the 10 Eyewitness News special coverage of the war in the Gulf. Just recapping on the news we had earlier about the possibility of terrorist attacks worldwide, and the PLO has called for a worldwide response to the attacks on Iraq. The first signs of anger and violence prompted by the military action have been reported in Pakistan, Italy and Jordan. Pakistani police have baton charged about 800 students chanting "Down with America" and "Long live Saddam Hussein" as they tried to march on a US cultural centre in Bashar. Italian police say petrol bombs were thrown at an American library and a British school in Milan. Damage was only slight. And the Egyptian ambassador's residence in Amman, Jordan, was stoned in protest at Egypt's role in the anti-Iraq alliance. Maximum alert has been ordered at airports, embassies, military bases and oil installations throughout Europe and the Middle East. Let's now rejoin CNN for the coverage of the Gulf War. And this is, of course, the Eyewitness News, 10 Eyewitness News coverage of the Gulf War. We too will take a break. Back with more in a moment. And on this Friday morning, we continue our special 10 Eyewitness News coverage of the Gulf War using the resources of CNN in America. And the latest information on the earlier report we had of Iraqi tank crews surrendering, and 50 T-62 Soviet-made Iraqi tanks surrendered to Egyptian forces in Saudi Arabia today, according to an Egyptian correspondent. Reporting from Hafra al-Batan in northern Saudi Arabia, a Middle East news agency correspondent said he was present when the crews surrendered with their tanks to Egyptian forces near the borders with Iraq and occupied Kuwait. They earlier quoted the commander of the Egyptian forces in Saudi Arabia as telling President Mubarak the tanks were on their way to positions of Egypt's 4th Armoured Division. Egypt has some 40,000 troops in Saudi Arabia, 5,000 more in the United Arab Emirates. Now, the CNN coverage continues, and we'll rejoin them. At the moment, they're taking the stock market report from Wall Street. And over these past 5 months since the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, CNN has helped the 10 network to stay right on top of that crisis, and in our news bulletins we've certainly been well on top of it. That coverage, of course, that tradition has continued throughout the day as CNN have continued to cover the war in the Gulf, and that will continue right after this break. Now, just before we went to that break, CNN gave us the telephone numbers for Americans who are concerned about loved ones, relatives and friends in the Gulf crisis, members of the armed forces. There is here in Australia a number also that you can ring if you have a relative or a close friend in the Gulf. And that number, of course, 061191, 061191. That number is for information on Australian service personnel who are in the Gulf and also for civilians who may be involved, although it's unlikely that any Australians will have been caught up in the fighting to date. Most of the Australians who are in the Middle East are in Israel or in Saudi Arabia. Neither of those countries has been involved directly to date. Neither has been under attack. Let's now go back to Mary-Anne Loughlin. And this is the 10 Eyewitness News special coverage of war in the Gulf. As Reid Collins just said, that coverage will continue. Unfortunately, the link between the CNN reporters in Baghdad and the outside world has been cut by order of the military censors in Iraq. They're hoping that that may be restored at some stage. At this particular point, though, it does look unlikely. It is now night time in Baghdad, and clearly there are more bombing raids being made. We just heard from Saudi Arabia that there were more American and British fighters taking off, presumably on bombing raids. So unfortunately, we do not have that eyewitness account from Baghdad at this particular time. Let's hope it can be restored. More coverage on this special and exclusive coverage of, from CNN of the Gulf War right after this break. Now, if you are a regular viewer of this station at this particular time, you'll know that we do bring you the overnight coverage from CNN. Of course, tonight it is a very special occasion because of the war that has broken out in the Gulf, and we are bringing you CNN's coverage 24 hours now, live, the coverage of that Gulf War. Let's go back to Mary Ann Laughlin in Atlanta.